And thank you so much for coming today. I'm really happy to see you and many familiar faces, which is very, very lovely, and I'm very happy to meet you people. Thanks for coming. I realized, also thanks to Pandora, that we were not very well signposted, so I wonder whether there are other people who might be looking out for us. So that's a lesson learned for me, signposting, and I will promise I'll do this better for the next time round. I'm a bit shy to actually stick the posters with my face all around the place, but I'll probably do it next time. It feels awkward when you are putting your face on the wall and you're just moving somewhere else, putting more faces around. So I would actually ask a colleague of mine if they would mind helping me with that. I will also promise to make better prints for the next time, because I realize the handouts, the writing on the handouts might be a bit small, so I will make sure that it comes out bigger next time when I'm printing. Otherwise, welcome.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Can we scribble on?
Absolutely. It's yours. It's your copy to take with you. Okay. And if you distributed these little feedbacks, if you can just circle what feels appropriate at the end of the session before you leave and just leave the feedback with me. If you put your email address there, in a way I can easily read it and retype it without making a mistake, I'm very happy to send you the PowerPoint presentation as well. And please, if you can think of topics or of something that may not be covered in the upcoming 6 talks that we're having from now until April next year, please let me know, make a suggestion on the paper as well, because it's always interesting for me to hear what you would like to hear more about, what you would be interested in, what would be more important. So please let me know. Right, let's start. So my name is Jitka, and this is the first talk from the series, which is called Are We Prepared to Live Longer? It is, for a good reason, a question, and we will come back to it at several stages of the talk. Please, if you have any questions, just let me know. If you are happy, you can wait with questions till the end, if that's what you want to. If not, just shoot questions straight away, because there are things I may be explaining, but I may not have explained. So, just please let me know. So, today's talk is, well, we all know that the population is rapidly aging, and we are aging since the day we're born. This is why these talks are not only meant for people of a certain age, they are meant for much younger generations as well. We're just trying to figure out how to get the talk across to people who would be interested, no matter what age really they have, because we're all aging since the moment we're born. And what we're going to talk about through the sessions is very helpful at any stage of our lives. So if you know about a group that might be interested in hearing the talk, just please send me through, because I would like to take these talks to help to reach groups as well. So we know that there is psychological and physical decline associated with aging, and that age-related processes are in general very difficult to predict. So our organs are aging at a different speed, each of the organs, and the systems that they create age differently as well. So it is incredibly difficult to say how our aging is going to look like. I'm going to mention a little bit more about genetics, because we may need to take account some genetic predispositions, but we just don't know whether these are going to affect us. Sometimes we can be just carrying a certain gene without having the gene manifested in our life course, and we just don't know. The science, the current science, knows still very little about such a tiny nitty-gritty genetics, so any predictions there are very difficult to make. So I would be linking these talks with a motto that you probably all know very well: use it or lose it. And we know about the cognitive and physical and psychological decline, and we know how physical, cognitive and psychological stimulation help for people, how important it is not to remain isolated, to try to go out and see people. Sometimes people feel they can do that, sometimes people feel they can't, and we need to help them to connect, because this really helps us to preserve the functions we do not want to lose. And when we think about our own aging, we need to think about the functions we do not want to lose. And these are the functions, and maybe quite many, that we need to keep, if I say working on it, perhaps we must work, to be mindful of. And so, these talks are also about building bridges. I feel as society, we have kind of accepted a convention that education is mostly for young people. And each one of us in this room and outside of this room, we would not agree with this statement. Nevertheless, when we look around ourselves in a university campus, it is kind of what it is. They are mostly young students. So one of the aims of these talks is also to create bridges between the research community that's sitting somewhere out there, or out there, researching, what is it, what is this, what is that, what are the most recent findings about dementia, about genetic predispositions for dementia, for example. But as academics, we're not always very skillful and perhaps ready to share what we know with the public. And yet, in this case, in aging-related research, the public should be the primary recipient of the research findings, because the public needs to know that the research findings are not always written in a very accessible way. So it's difficult for people, even if they can find it somewhere located online, reading it is actually not a very pleasurable experience sometimes. So this creates there are several paradoxes. So one paradox is that the older we get, and again this links to, as we work as society, that actually makes the education very easy and accessible and for younger people. But the older we get, the more existing schemas and new information we need to assimilate. So when education is combined with experience, only then it becomes useful knowledge. Another paradox is that we have more need for education the older we are. We need to know how to stay healthy, how to stay well, because we are going to have longer lives than our predecessors have. We want to make sure that they're not only longer, but they're also well spent. And some of this, quite a lot actually, might depend on our own choices. We call it today lifestyle choices. And it is kind of a luxury that our predecessors didn't have. And a third paradox is that internet, libraries, there is a lot of material and information around aging and what we should do and what we shouldn't do, and what do we do if we have diabetes, and what do we do in order to prevent having diabetes or glucose intolerance, etc. But it's not always accessible in terms of language. It's not always accessible to people who don't have the academic training to actually see whether these research findings that are publicized here or there have some reliability and validity, whether there has been peer review of the whole process, not only about the research, but also about publishing the results of the research, because everybody makes mistakes. Academics are not excluded from that. We make mistakes, that's why our paper should be peer reviewed, because editors and reviewers pick up on mistakes that we made, because we just thought we have already seen this page 3 times, we can't bother reading it again and again and again. But then if we don't do it, somebody should, because otherwise wrong information is published. So people, and older people especially, who may not be very easily techy, may have difficulty to access this information, and if they access it, they may not be sure whether it actually applies to them, because we're all different as well. So this is more of a rationale for these talks, and that I actually started doing about 14 years ago as a PhD student at Charles University in Prague and with association with Third Age University. And these talks that I'm going to be going through today and until the 6 talks that we have planned, they have been developed last year with Stowe Health General Practice, because I've been approached by them. They said, well, we're very forward-looking and we have many patients, and we just like facilitating for them the best aging we can, and some of it comes with education and learning. So that's what I've been doing last year, preparing to set the camp at the Open University. These lectures or talks are also part of an international online education platform for clinicians and allied health professionals in China, and they are streamed via UKMed and Cambridge Medical Academy, which is not very easy because there is quite a interesting censorship in China still, so some of the materials can go through, some access to YouTube videos or any other videos is not really allowed, so it's an interesting dynamics. We will be looking into approaches that may enable us to live longer and healthier lives. Well, we're going to be living longer lives anyway, so let's make them healthier and happier. We will go a little bit through theories of aging and biomedical and psychosocial aspects of aging. This is something I've done my PhD on, and it's something that has stayed with me quite closely because sometimes we know fragmented information. Oh, this happens when one is aging, and this happens when one is aging. Maybe not necessarily, but I believe it's useful to know what age-related changes bring naturally, because it is a physiological process. So this is what is going to be mostly the aim of our talks. It's to convey what actually happens naturally and what can we do to brace ourselves for that by being mindful of a few things that are quite easy. I started calling them 5 pillars. One is around nutrition, hydration, physical stimulation, sometimes we call it physical activity, exercise, what have you, social stimulation, connecting, creating networks or keeping networks, connecting with people. And cognitive stimulation, which is a part around learning. I will probably not be using the word education much, because education to me has a connotation of something that is being prescribed. This is what you're going to do today, this is what you're going to learn. So it's not a word that I'm going to be using a lot, but I'll probably use more learning, because it's very useful and healthy to learn things, new things, as often as we can. Right. When you will see this image, this word cloud, it will be time when we will start standing up, moving about a little bit, stretching a little. So just for you to be prepared, we have some little stretching, some little exercise coming. Jane is already smiling because she sat through one of my sessions already. So, right. This is the plan for the talk. So the first talk that we're having today is about, are we prepared to live longer? So we'll talk about biomedical psychosocial aspects of aging, age-related conditions, bone health. I'll mention frailty as well, because it's a syndrome that's quite important these days and affects a lot of people. We will also see a bit more of an overview for the next talks. The next talk on 26th of November will be about aging brain. So again, there will be basic facts on neurodegenerative conditions that are associated with aging, and age-related and non-age-related memory loss, because we have both. Sorry, I skipped one. On 20th of January, we will have a session around nutritional needs of aging, and I'm currently working with one of the nutritionists working in Milton Keynes. So she will help me to put in the useful links and places where we can refer people to go to if they have queries about this or about that, or if they would like to see someone to discuss nutrition on more in-depth basis. The session in February will be about pharmacotherapy while aging. This is one of the huge talks it will be mostly about age-related changes in pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. Pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics are two very specific terms. I am purposefully having them there, although they're not very user-friendly for now. But they have to do with how drugs behave once we take them in, and what is the body response to the drugs. So pharmacokinetics is about what happens in terms of absorption. So we take a medication, we take a paracetamol because we have a headache. So it is about how long it takes for the paracetamol to absorb, to start taking effect, etc. And how long it takes also to clear it out of the body, because to do this we need functioning liver and kidneys. And we need to be relatively well hydrated. And this is one of, I think, very important talks, because sometimes we're all tempted to take medication over the counter, and sometimes we have other medication that we take daily. And we don't always think about the interactions that the drugs may have in our body. But with aging, the metabolic processes slow down. Liver function and kidney function slow down naturally. If we don't drink enough, it further slows the metabolism, including liver and kidney function, down even more. This then means that some drugs, before they get cleared out from our body, can interact with drugs that we take newly in. And this can be on spurious basis, it can be a Nurofen, just over the counter because we have a huge headache, or it can be some medication that we're supposed to be taking regularly, and we're not really watching, this is when I should take this, and this is when I should take that. And we don't always ask our GPs or pharmacists, how long after I've taken this, I can take this new drug. And this is something that we should always be asking about, because it's very important. Then if kidneys cannot clear the medication out and it meets with other medication that is not compatible, it can create toxicity. And then our slowing down, overworked and dehydrated kidneys have even more difficulty to cope. So it seems like just a talk, but it actually has huge implications. So, and it links very tightly to nutrition and to hydration, because we know that sometimes you overhear the doctor or the pharmacist saying, well, you take this with your breakfast, or you take this before the breakfast, but we don't specify how long after taking the pill I can have a breakfast. We don't specify whether you can drink coffee or tea when you're taking it. We all know that if you take paracetamol and you want it to make it work a bit faster, you drink a bit of coffee with it. But actually sometimes your headache might be just related to being dehydrated. So drinking more water would not make you take the medication. But then there are things to be mindful of. And one other thing that we need to be mindful of as well is that as the metabolic processes slow down while aging, the medication might take longer to get absorbed and to start being effective. So if we have a headache when we're 20 and we take the paracetamol, it's gone in 20-30 minutes, or we just forget about it, or it's fine, and the headaches don't tend to stay because dehydration doesn't take such toll on our organism when we're 20. When we're 30, 40, it might be a bit different, but when we're 50, when we're after 50, when we're 60, when we're 70, when we're 80, the metabolic processes have slowed down significantly by then. So if we know that we usually take acylpurine or we take paracetamol, you just know what works for you after the years. But at some point, it may happen that you actually take it, and in 40 minutes, you're still thinking, well, I took it 40 minutes ago, nothing has happened. I still have this huge headache. Maybe the drug's not working, maybe I need to take another one. And that's usually a huge mistake, and it happens very easily because we just want the headache to go. That's all we want. But by taking another drug so quickly, we increase the toxicity that our kidneys and liver may not be easily coping with, and then it can have many more corollaries. We feel dizzy, wobbly, we have a bigger tendency to fall, to have an injury, etc. But these are relatively minor because these side effects don't stay. But the liver toxicity and the kidney toxicity, when the livers cannot clear it out of the body, this can have more of a temporary effect, not temporary, the other one. Long-lasting, forever-lasting effect, irreversible effect on some other organs. So, yeah, so it's going to be an interesting talk. And Sona Mehta, who is lead pharmacist in Milton Keynes, and she works on the CCG, actually kindly agreed to come and co-facilitate the talk with me. As she's a pharmacist, she will also know where she can point, what are the resources locally accessible that you need to know about.
Could I just ask a question? Do you think she might be bringing in the fact that so many people now use herbal remedies as well, and we're really not sure how they interact?
What it does, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Jane. Thank you for raising it. I'll note it down because it's something we should definitely include, make sure we have on the presentation. Yeah. Yeah, fabulous. It is very important, and there are many supplements that exist these days, freely available on the market, but sometimes we should not be anywhere near some of them, and we need to know which these are, and this is going to be very different for each one of us. So one message across these talks is also to become seriously a partner in our own self-care, because it's so important. It cannot be outsourced to our GP, no matter how fantastic he or she is. It cannot be outsourced to a pharmacist or a health visitor. We, as much as we're able to, we need to take part in this. It's a partnership, because if the GP prescribes some medication for us that we haven't taken before, and you feel, it makes you feel strange, and after a few days you realize, oh, maybe it could be the medication. You are the only person who can actually go and talk to the GP. Nobody else can do that. You know how it makes you feel if you don't want these effects because you feel you might be at risk of something, or some medication have sedation effects. People don't go out, people don't move about, and it brings further weakness and deterioration on the physical side of the system. So that's why we need to be partners in our care, because we know how the drugs make us feel. If we want, we can try different dosage, we can try different drugs. If we are after a certain effect, sometimes drinking more and going more often out for even short walks might do us better than actually some type of medication that in the end we don't need so much to be in, because current medicine these days treats mostly symptoms, but is not after the causes. And if you don't become partner in your own care, the GP cannot know what the causes may be. So we need to make them know, we need to help them to understand, and we need to understand what is important for us. And there are many symptoms that I will be mentioning throughout, also during the talk next in November around the aging brain. Just there are many dehydration, severe and chronic dehydration can be mimicking early onset dementia. Memory loss makes us feel dizzy, fuzzy, confused, and it's just the dehydration. This can be easily treated. So if something doesn't feel right, start drinking is always the best thing to do.
Any liquid or just water?
Yeah, the water is very good for us. So I would say there is we should have at least 1.5 liters every day. It's just for the basic metabolic processes to happen. And by metabolic processes, I don't mean just eating food, processing food, but it's hormonal chain reactions that just govern our our lives. So sometimes due to dehydration, some organs are affected more than other, and if organ that is supposed to produce specific hormone is affected, then the hormone production will change. It will either spike up or drop down, and it will create other chain reactions in the hormonal chain. So, yeah, so 1.5 liter at least should be the strict minimum. That is without counting any teas or coffees.
I was just going to say, can you include tea in there?
Tea and coffee and alcohol are dehydrating beverages.
Well, tea as well, I thought tea
as
and
well.
coffees.
Tea as well, yeah. On the other hand, I would not suggest drinking more than 3 liters of water a day unless you're exercising a lot, because then you sweat a lot and then you need to replenish, but then you need to think about minerals and salts and electrolytes to replenish as well. But let's say between 1.5 to 2 liters of clear liquid every day should be a nice threshold that should mostly keep us safe. Some people need to drink a bit more, some people who may have a tendency to create kidney stones, etc. But we should all keep relatively well hydrated.
And that's spread across the day.
Spread across the day,
I
yeah.
don't sort of take
Yeah.
1.5 litres a
No,
day.
not ideal.
Don't forget.
Not ideal. Not ideal. Although, instead of not drinking at all, I would still go for binging the 1.5 litre water. But then it overloads the kidneys as well, again. So we spread it throughout the day. It's very good.
Yeah.
We would be drinking when we're not thirsty. We'd be eating when we're not hungry, because then we're not gonna overeat. We're not gonna overdrink, but we will stay hydrated regularly throughout. Drinking with medication, whatever medication we're taking, we need to drink. If we drink tea or coffee, ideally we would have a cup of water to go with. Yeah.
I can't be taking the water to bed. I mean, I can't bear. I do take. We both take, and I always put more in his glass. And mine doesn't disappear.
Yeah.
I do try very hard. I
Yeah.
get up for go and visit the lady.
Yeah, I understand. And it's not something easy to recommend because it has its corollaries. We don't sleep as well as we get older. I've woke up today, 1:30. I just couldn't sleep. So I just packed my stuff a bit sooner because usually I leave home 5 o'clock when I go to Milton Keynes. I just left 4:30. But just couldn't sleep. And I thought, that came early. And so sometimes we sleep better, sometimes not. But with age, the sleep does not usually tend to improve unless we have a very specific regime around physical activity that makes us nicely physically tired and the brain switches off. So if the brain is over firing around everything and we go and exercise, not just before we go to bed, but we go and exercise, we sweat a bit, it takes the mind off. The mind can switch off a bit and then it might be easier to actually sleep, because once your body is tired, the sleep will take precedence. But it takes some time to actually work out how much you need to be working out to actually sleep better, and whether it is gonna do it for you in the long term. But the sleep is not great. We wake up, depending on how much we eat, when we eat, we wake up and we go to the toilets, which, by the way, toilets are just over there, very conveniently placed. Pushing all this water on you. So this is not ideal, because for some people who have, for example, mobility problems, it's risky. Getting up at night, tripping over obstacles, and if people can go to the toilet, they're great, but some people have a difficulty to get up, and fewer times they get up. So it has corollaries. It's not just a suggestion lightly made, but perhaps there can be a way of drinking a bit more in the earlier hours of the day, and perhaps a bit less towards the evening to prevent getting up too much, because then we don't sleep because we need to go again. Right? But we need to stay hydrated, and it's important for all our tissues, it's important for our physical health, it's important for our mental health and well-being, and for our organs functioning. Now, one of the things we're talking about in association with aging are slowed down metabolic processes. So the metabolism slows down as a natural, it's natural, it's physiological, it just happens with aging. Staying hydrating well, can either prevent a steep slowing down of the metabolic rate, or it can keep it at some convenient levels for the body, so that all the organs are functioning. We need water for all basic metabolic processes. So water, very important.
Can I just say, as a practical point, for many older people, they don't really understand what a litre is. So it might be better in pints.
To break it into
Or
cups
both.
or pints.
Pints.
I'm not used to think about pints. You don't do the calculation.
We go out and buy a pint of milk.
Absolutely.
I'm going to say it's 4.2 litres. I thought it was foreign things.
Will do, it's a good point. So the next lecture after that in March will be about Move It and Breathe. So it will be more about age-related changes in muscles, tendons, bones, and the importance of breathing well and exercising well and enough, and breathing well, because breathing is incredibly important. We don't sometimes realize how we breathe, because sometimes we don't. We get stressed and we hold our breath. But for a good functioning, for a good supply, we need for a good supply of oxygen and glucose, nutrients to our organs and brain, because brain takes about 20% of all that, of the whole supply of oxygen for the whole body, and of the nutrients, of the glucose. So we need to breathe regularly. We need to help the blood to circulate as regularly as possible, so that this supply of oxygen and nutrients is regular as well. If we don't exercise, if we stay sedentary, if we don't drink, because metabolic processes slow further down, and if we are not aware of how we're breathing and we're just holding our breath whenever we get stressed, which is a natural reaction, we're not doing ourselves a huge favor. So this is something we need to be aware as well of. And we're going to talk about breathing throughout the sessions, because we have the stretching coming up. And the last talk will be about standing tall. So it will be based on all the previous talks, and it will just add to one to the other and culminate or peak into the postural alignment, and what are the age-related changes on our postural alignment and how it affects our stance. And we will probably understand this already before we get there, because it will be incorporated in the stretching sessions that we're going to have to. So that's what you have coming. So we will be exploring how using this knowledge really may facilitate self-management for as much as possible while aging, being partners in our care, and optimizing cognitive and physical well-being. Of course, we're promoting physical activity, social activity, networking, learning, and healthy lifestyle, which can be sometimes a bit of a tricky term, because it's still a luxury to have lifestyle choices. But because we don't know what the genetics has for us, our lifestyle choices are the best bets we've got to make our life as healthy and as enjoyable as possible for as long as we can. Please don't forget the evaluations form, because it's important for me to know what we need to look at there more. And this time enough. So I will probably ask you to just stand up if you can. We will be doing a little bit of just postural awareness exercise while standing, and then we'll repeat it while sitting. I'll probably come here. wonder if you can see me. Yeah.
Can we move from our chair?
No, yeah, we will sit later. We will sit later. Look at that. So if you just think about how you're standing, what part of your feet is on the floor? Are you standing more on your heels? Maybe move onto your heels, move onto your toes. Just shift the posture very lightly. It doesn't have to be a big shift or a big range of movement. It's just remind ourselves that we have a whole foot to stand on, not just a part of it. So when you think you are standing equally, or when you're using equally front part of your foot and the back part of your foot, you might have probably reached the middle. You will feel it. So then we can go sideways to realize whether we're actually staying on the outer side of our feet or on the inner side of our feet. Of course, a balance, perfect balance, is the best, but it's not always possible. And sometimes we have lifelong habits that make that we actually would be standing more on certain parts of our foot than we perhaps need to. So it's good to remind ourselves where we are in terms of the sides. Usually, now, if you can just put your weight on the outer side of your feet, so you lift a little bit the arch. Yeah. And then you come back, and then you lift the outer side of the foot, and you stand on the arch, and you're actually trying to stretch the arch so much that it would be flat on the floor. It won't be, but this is where you're trying to get. And while you're doing this, try to use the whole foot to now put on the floor and just push away from the ground. And pushing away, I can see you raising up, I can see you straightening, and this is the immediate effect of actually pushing against the ground, pushing against the gravity. And it's a very important thing to do because gravity has us all the time. If you relax and you just allow it, this is where we're going. We're going shoulders forward, which then impacts on our knees. We're going to see that weight shift soon in one of the stretching sessions. So when you just try to find the middle again, going to the side, and when you found it, just push away from the floor and turn your head to one side, slowly, gently, turn your head to the other side. And again, to one side, to the other side. And now to comparison to that, if you just release everything, you don't push away from the floor, you're not trying to straighten up, but you just let the gravity take toll on you, and you're trying to turn your head, you will probably realize that the range of movement is much more limited. When you push away, rise up, your spine straightens, the range of movement is usually much better.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just going to share an experience with you. Am I allowed to say? I mean, I was having whatever the health check was, I don't remember being an older person. And I was stood up because I've always been 5'5.5", and they were doing height, weight. I stood happily against the wall, and she went 5 foot. Was it 5? I had an inch and a half down.
I think you lost half an inch.
No, I lost an inch and a half,
Oh.
and she said, "Oh, it's 5 foot." What was it? Must have been 5'4", and I just said, "Excuse me, I beg your pardon." And I stood and did exactly what she did. I raised myself as tall as I could, really looked high, and she did it again. It was exactly the same. And she said, "As you're older," actually it was our daughter, wasn't it, who studies it, right? She studied, and she said, "Don't worry, your spine does shrink."
Yeah.
I mean, vertebrae start disappearing, and it compacts all together.
It does. It compacts, and it's also because we have the intervertebrate discs.
When you get slipped,
Then
things they
that
start.
just get squeezed,
It's
and
right.
it's natural. It's just the gravity will take a toll. But on the other hand, whenever we're in a gravity field, ideally we would be pushing against it. And you may feel that actually pushing away from the floor makes you readjust a little bit the way you're standing. It involves your muscles. Now, most of us would be having posture somewhere, perhaps there. When we try to get somewhere, we go, and we just think that the faster our shoulders get there, the better. But it's not exactly how, or it's not how it ideally should be, because this is our engine. So instead of leaning forward, try to see what happens in your body when you lean back a little. Just a little bit. You push away from the floor and you lean a little back. And then you will start feeling that your abdominal muscles are taking part in maintaining your upright posture. And this is where ideally we would be most of the day, because then you are using core muscles and abdominal muscles and tiny muscles, all the muscles that we need to use, and we naturally make them participate in maintaining upright posture. And then the abdominal wall will provide you with a support that helps the spine to carry it all. And our heads are very heavy. Not just heads, but the top is heavy. So this is where we ideally would be. Now, we can try to sit down. Sit. This is going to be
All these muscles I've just been using,
Jane knows, she would probably say, don't reduce so much, because this one's going to be even worse. You think you're sitting, but you're going to be working hard. So the same principle applies really. We're sitting, but we're in a gravity field. So ideally, we would be pushing away from the floor. But we don't only have the floor to push away from, we also have our bottom to push away from, the chair to push away from. So if you put your knees at an angle where you can actually have your whole foot on the floor and push away, it will take you a little bit back. So you need to push down here, and you push against the chair as well. Now this helps you, this already puts your pelvis in an anteversion, a little bit forwards, so that the spine can actually use it as a base. So you're raising up, feeling might be even better because you're raising up from the chair. This is a huge difference. It may not be so pertinent when you're actually standing, but when you're sitting, the difference is much bigger. Now, this would be ideally how we would be sitting, because we're in a gravity field, and you will start feeling how your muscles in your calves, in your thighs, and abdominal muscles start responding to your new sitting. So if you push, if you focus the pressure against the floor, if you use your toes and you just push mostly away from the floor with your toes, you will feel your calves at the back of the muscles at the back are really working hard. If you use your toes, the muscle pressure changes. If you put your whole foot, now your calves get activated all around, and if you push the inside part of your feet down and against the floor, you will feel the muscles on the side of your calves. They are peroneal muscles, and they have an incredibly important function in terms of posture maintenance and keeping joints in a neutral position. This is something we're going to be talking a lot about through our stretching moments. So I'll probably leave it there. I'll let you play with it, toy with it. Every now and then I might just nosily check whether you're still pushing away from the floor. But we need to be aware of things that are against us. Aging and gravitation are definitely some of those. So these are just instructions that we will interpret.
So that's one of the troubles with this. There's so many things to think about. You know, this is not very good at remembering some of this.
I very much agree with you, but you know what is the funny bit? Is that we all know how to do that, and we all know how to use our diaphragm, not only as a breathing muscle, because we mostly use diaphragm when we breathe out, but if we learn how to use diaphragm, relearn how to use the diaphragm when we breathe in, diaphragm becomes a postural muscle. And it's an incredibly important one. It takes part in abdominal breathing, which is much healthier type of breathing than chest breathing, especially upper chest breathing, because it comes with destabilization of the organism, because our body works as an inverted pendulum. So the higher we put our center of gravity, the more easily we will fall when tripping. So diaphragm is incredibly important, and I'll be talking about diaphragm quite a lot through this series, but also today through the stretching sessions. And it is something we all knew how to use when we were newborn babies, and we were lying on the back, and we needed to start turning our head. We had to engage the diaphragm to stabilize the core, so that whenever we want to move one part of the body, we need to stabilize another one. And the stabilizing part of the body starts with contracting the diaphragm. So we all knew how to do this because we are walking on our 2 feet. If we didn't start using diaphragm as newborns, we would not be turning our heads. If we wouldn't be turning our head, we would not be turning around. Then we wouldn't be crawling. This development would just not happen. So we all know how to do it. The question is, why the moment we stand up, we just decide, it's not even our decision, we're just not prompted to stay mindful about that. I'll get back to that. So it's not exactly, I take your point that there are many things to think about at the same time. On the other hand, most of those are things we know, we have done before, our body knows them. It's just about getting back to it and finding that synergy between the back side and the front side, so that we find the balance somewhere in between while still pushing away from the floor. By the way, right. So I'll just go very quickly through this. It's about basic facts. The life expectancy has risen massively, and I've already said that. And interestingly, within the next 5 years, for the first time in human history, the number of adults aged 65 and over will outnumber children under the age of 5. This is quite a thing. We are going to be living longer, like it or not. We just need to be ready. We need to make our longer life as good as we can. Now I'm going to get to the genetics. Genetic doesn't predetermine everything that happens in our life. We're usually talking about genetics, and we're talking about epigenetics. Genetic is the hereditary information we carry over from our predecessors, from our parents, grandparents, and generations. Epigenetics is the influence of environment that we're born into. There are many people who are saying it's genetic and everything is genetic and whatever you don't have in your genes cannot happen. Not so sure. Then you have people who say, no, it's all about epigenetics, it's all about the nurture, it's all about the environment we're born into and we were raised into. I will let you make your own conclusion. I think they are both incredibly important, but we still have a choice. We should not forget we have a choice. So, are we victims of our genes? We don't know. We still don't know enough about genetics and about the nitty-gritty how it works. Some conditions might have been carried in the family for generations, but people did not live long enough for the condition to demonstrate. We just don't know. What do we know? I don't know, for example, much about my maternal, paternal grandparents. I haven't met my paternal grandparents and I've met my mother's parents, but they died relatively soon and I was still young. When you are 5 or 6 or 10, you don't ask questions about, you get there much later to be interested about how their life was, how was their mother, how was their grandparents, whether they've met them. So we don't always even have this information, what has been in the family. So it's sometimes lucky to actually know that there is a specific blood, I don't know, a gene or a blood condition or something that may be inherited, and we can take precautions and we can just brace ourselves for that. And if we're mindful about the 5 pillars, nutrition, hydration, physical, social, and cognitive stimulation, we're doing everything we can. And the physical stimulation is amazing. We are meant to be physically active. And it's not only in older age, throughout our life. What pains me is kids sitting in the class for many, many hours and then become jumpy and wanting to run and climb. And we're disciplining them because this is not how you behave in school. But they're not supposed to be sitting for such a long time in the first place. We're not supposed to be sitting such a long time in front of our computers. We're not meant for that. So physical activity in whatever form, and it's not going to the gym or going swimming. If you can do this, it's fantastic. But it doesn't mean only that. It means being active. Go walk wherever you can. Take the stairs whenever you can, for as long as you can. And the buildings are built in a way, for example, that doesn't help. The moment we enter a place, we see lift in front of us. You need to ask where the staircase is if you really want to use it. And then it's in an isolated place. So if something happens, it might take quite some time before somebody might come and help you. We're not doing ourselves a favor. So genetic, we cannot have much control over what we carry as genes.
You can know what you, if you've got a genetic condition and you passed it on for however and whatever, you then can think, well, I'm not, no more of that because I might produce that one or whatever.
But the thing is that
should
you
I
never
be
know.
genetic? It's
There are,
quite difficult.
yeah, but there are families that, for example, have history of dementia through, for example, maternal line. So the mothers would, mother of the mother, the mother of the mother, there would be some cognitive decline that would have been noticed by others. But it doesn't mean that the last one in a row, that the daughter or the son will have dementia or Alzheimer's disease or another cognitive impairment, just because their lifestyle might have been different and it might have influenced or strengthened the mind and the body to the level where the body can cope. On the other hand, sometimes there is no history in the family and dementia happens, cancer happens, anything can happen. We cannot prevent that. That's why we cannot predict aging. It's virtually impossible. We don't know whether our heart is going to get older faster in comparison to our stomach or our kidneys. We just don't know. All we can do is to exercise, make sure the blood circulates regularly, bringing around nutrients, plenty of oxygen, because we know how important breathing is and we breathe, making sure we stay well hydrated and be as strong as we can. But that takes choices that we need to make and follow through. And this is not always easy. So I'm not standing here saying, oh, it's all rosy when you can exercise. Exercising is a hard work. There are many days where you just wake up and oh my God, I'm exercising there. I just, oh my God, I just feel like I want to stay in bed. How many times do you go? How many times do you stay? So it is not possible to get everything 100% correct. But perhaps having some proportionality, doing it mostly, okay, mostly drinking, there will be days when you will be drinking less and when in the evening you will just have a few more glasses of wine and fine. But for as long as this doesn't become the majority, the body can cope. It is what we tell our body to do. Our body responds well to regimes, routines. So one question is, are we victim of our genes? Another question is, are we victims of our nurture? Because we're hugely influenced by what family we're born into, what family relationships there are in the close and wider family, choices we see people making since the day one we're born. We may not even understand how much this has influenced us over the years. So sometimes coming out of this and realizing, well, my parents made this decision and their parents made this decision, and it was particular because they lived in another period of time, that things were different. Do I need to make this decision? Although it's my inclination to do so, perhaps I can stop and think, because we have the choice, but we're not always aware of the choice. And this is where I firmly believe that actually learning, I might use education for this once, but that learning comes. It's learning about things around us and about us gives us choices that we sometimes were not aware we were having. So that's where the choices come, and that's why I say winners by choice. Because when we do everything we can do, it may work, it may not work so well, it may not work at all, because some of the parts, either the genetic one or another one, will be stronger. We just don't know. We just don't know, but it's still worth it. Because there is the day-to-day life that can be enjoyed more if we are hydrated, with blood circulating regularly. I'll be hitting you with the hydration a lot. Wait till we had a nutrition talk. What happens while aging as well? Sometimes happens, sometimes it doesn't. It's when the physiological processes that aging brings turn pathological. Now, we don't usually have control over that. It can happen because of the manifestation of the gene is very strong, and the condition will manifest no matter what. Even if we were not aware that somebody from our predecessors and in our family has suffered from this particular disease or condition, the genetic may win. But it doesn't have to. However, sometimes the physiological processes turning pathological can be due to an injury. If we get injured and, for example, we're taken to the hospital, we have a surgery, we're under general anesthesia, it is a huge shock for our system, it's a huge trauma. Sometimes events like this may trigger physiological processes turning pathological. We're not going to be focusing on pathologies in these talks very much. We're going to be mostly drumming up the bright side. What is it we can actually do? Because when the pathologies become pathologies, there is just time to be counted. But then still, it's better to stay hydrated.
I'm trying honest.
And if you would like, there's a lot of water.
I'm sure
I can actually bring the water around and circulate it. We have
I drink a lot of water, but it's after it's been through the winery or the brewery.
Anybody for a
Yes.
top up?
I don't think you've got a cup.
Goodness.
Ah,
Oh yeah.
Cup.
thank you.
Anybody want a cup?
Who's
Who's you told?
That's it.
Before you start doing this, maybe you've got it very much. So without, I'm going to move it with one, because that's supposed to do that. So there we go.
I've got enough hands.
Oh, because I have some more.
Yes,
Not to drink enough water.
Cheers. I'm going to make it to you.
Don't worry, I'm trying hard.
Can't quite get it.
Oh, it's not if that's another problem. What more water, darling? What you've done?
Yes, please.
Do you have a cup?
I'm all right.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
Oh.
Can I get you some more? No. Okay. Yes, I know. But all these don't have to be remembered so much. They're just few theories that illustrate how researchers come to think about aging. They need to think in ways of organizing things and systematizing them. So there are 4 main theories that are about Hayflick limit or Hayflick phenomenon is how many cell divisions the cell can actually go through. So cells are being born, they're getting divided. The moment they can't get divided anymore, the cell dies. When the cell dies, there's a tiny bit of decline. There are many cells dying in our organism every day, and many cells still being born. It has been thought for quite a long time that actually neurons, the brain cells, we're not producing new neurons after, let's say, 23, 25 years of age. When I was 25, my father came to the room and said, from now on, you're going to be getting dumber and dumber. Happy birthday, Dad! And I said, fair enough. It's not so true. We still can get some new neurons, but the generation is generating them is a bit more of a slower process than it was till during the first 25 years of age. There are other theories. Some of them are called wear and tear, so it's about the system becoming too used. This is something we're going to be talking a lot about when we come to do a session around nutrition, because we'll be talking about metabolism and how we use insulin and how whatever we eat produces insulin response in our body and how much insulin we actually have, etc. Because pancreas needs to create it. And there is not an endless resource for pancreas to do that over our lifespan. So we're going to get to that. There are theories around oxidative stress and apoptosis. Oxidative stress is perhaps not on the side that you might be very familiar with, but you're all familiar with antioxidants. So it kind of counteracts the oxidative stress theory in one part of it, in one small part of it. Then there is also a theory about apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. So some cells are programmed to die. Now, whether this is covered by the Hayflick limit, Hayflick phenomenon, because they die because they have divided already many times, or because they're just programmed to do this for another reason or in another way, it's not the most important thing for us. There's a little bit more information about the various theories. But whichever theory we go with, the response by the body to aging changes or to age-related changes is on the systemic level and also individual organ level. That's why I said at the beginning that every organ will be getting or aging in its own way, and it will somehow, for example, if we're talking about heart and cardiovascular system, if the heart is aging very fast for whatever reason, it's a muscle, it will affect the whole cardiovascular system. Or if the heart stays strong, but the veins and arteries are suffering serious wear and tear, then it will affect the response of the muscle pumping the blood around the body. Now, muscle, for as long as muscle goes, there is a lot we can do for. Aging is not very amazing with all the decline it brings, but we have muscles. Muscles are our power because we can exercise our muscles for as long as we live. And it has a hugely beneficial function, not just for the muscle itself, but for the organs that are nearby. Nothing in our bodies works in an isolated way. You cannot isolate one part, work on it, and make the whole system better. Everything is interconnected. So if we exercise and increase the capillarity of our muscles, the small veins and vessels that go through the muscle, if we increase that, then we increase the amount of nutrients going through the muscle. And because muscles are around bones, we also increase the amount of nutrients that's getting into the bones. So muscles are hugely important, and they're a huge trump card that we hold. We just need to make the decision to work with it. there are self-repair mechanisms that are affected. We are born with, and this is genetically predetermined, we're born with some self-repair mechanisms. When our senescence or aging reaches a certain stage, these mechanisms can be affected, which means that the body has a decreased capacity to self-repair, which means that more conditions might be manifesting because the body just cannot repair them just by the way anymore as it could in the early ages. Nervous system is another system we need to think very much about. It's linking our brain and our periphery. What happens with aging in general is that the response, not only our brains do not spark so much, it's also linking to sleep sometimes. It's sometimes linking to hydration. Again, I said it again. But it's also about how quickly the information travels to the periphery. And this is something where we use a term proprioception, which is how we feel when we, for example, touch with our feet, what we feel, what's the perception on the distant part of the neural system. So we have central part and the distant part, the periphery. So the information travels, and with aging, the travel speed slows down, and the response from periphery slows down as well. Or, if you want, the stimulus from periphery comes slower to the brain issues a response, but before the response gets there, it might be already late, which is sometimes a cause for falls, tripping over obstacles, because we walk, and we trip over something. There is, by the way, potential haphazard. We trip over something, and before our brain realizes and sends the response back to actually lift the foot, we're already somewhere on the way down. If we are dehydrated and we feel dizzy or lightheaded, we have low blood pressure, the fall is even more likely. If we are walking with our shoulders forward, it's even more likely because we're caught away there. If we're breathing in a way that we breathe in our chest and in our upper chest, we're even more likely to get there because the inverted pendulum is just working against us. So there are things we just need to be mindful that are linking to the neuronal system, but it's also how we facilitate all those systems to work. There is endocrine system, which is very important. It's a collection of glands and organisms that secrete hormones into the circulatory system. Now, as I mentioned earlier, one hormonal secretion prompts another, and not only the type of hormone, but also a dosage. So less of a hormone produced into the system or injected into the system will have its response, probably more of another hormone or less. This will affect another hormone in the chain. So this is something that's almost impossible to control. It just can be managed, facilitated, again with being mindful of the 5 pillars. I've already mentioned musculoskeletal system, cardiovascular system, and again, here we go. Lifestyle is crucial. 5 pillars of aging well. Now, this is something that preempts the talk for the November about the aging brain. This is when we will be talking a lot about, we sometimes, as we grow older, we have kind of diminished ability to remember objects, where objects are located, or names, or as you said it earlier on, you know what you want to say, you can't put your finger on it, 2 minutes later when you're talking about something else it comes up. This is not only while aging, it can happen when we're long-term under stress in much younger ages. My 4-year-old is incredibly energetic. I can't even remember when I slept. And then when I can sleep, I wake up 1:30 or 1, thinking, is he breathing? So by not sleeping, in addition to all aging mechanisms and dehydration, is we need sleep. We need for our brain and bodies to rest. we need to find a way to sleep. When we don't sleep, we may be forgetful. When we take certain medications, we can be forgetful. When we are chronically dehydrated, we may be very, very, very forgetful. So these are a few things we need to think about. I've mentioned the medication we're taking, where we need to also be mindful about how we're eating, because it also spikes our blood sugar. It also contributes to us feeling lightheaded sometimes, because just we may have low blood sugar. So that's what I mean. Eat when we're not hungry, because what you teach your body to respond to, the body will be responding to it. The body likes some routines.
Because one of the things that certainly happens with me, and I think with most people, is that I can remember things from when I was 10 years old. I can't remember what I had for breakfast. You know, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Don't worry, it's just a senior moment.
Yeah, and
None of those you go.
to some extent, all this is physiological and comes with the aging processes. And it's the wear and tear.
Yeah.
And it's the tiredness of the system, because when we may have similar experiences, but that's why I mentioned sleep, because when we don't sleep in younger age, it can bring all that. When we don't sleep and we're older, it further, how do I say this, impacts, fuel, the physiological age-related changes. But that's also why we need to...
But does it matter when you sleep? I mean, you know, Maggie Thatcher was well known for napping, you know, so, and I do. I mean, I'll have an hour of sleep at night and then get up and go to bed.
I think we're all different in that. I think, at the basis, I think getting any sleep whenever we can is a good thing, when we can.
Yeah. I can sleep, almost sleep standing up as well. I certainly sleep sat like this.
Me too, after those 4 years. Stripping. putting stickers to my...
You've done well today, you've kept me awake.
I'm glad, but you know what, I've been told by people, especially when I go and lecture overseas in Prague, for example, I have an already established group of people, and they're usually around 180, 200 people in the room. It's a huge theatre room. And some people were telling me, as you go through the lecture, your voice becomes so hypnotic.
Oh.
And some people actually sleep through the lecture. But it's good, sleep is good. Sleep is good. You can read about this whenever.
Just don't lecture after lunch.
Yeah.
Should I move it a bit to earlier hours? Honestly, who sleeps after 5? 6?
3 this morning.
Yeah. So, some of it has to do also with stress management. Stress is a huge part of our life. As I mentioned earlier, it also makes us catch the breath. So whenever you catch yourself catching the breath, breathe. Because breathing is important. I am not making a huge distinction between what is physical and what is mental or psychological, because for me, all is one. Whatever we do in one sphere will always have an impact in the other. Do you want to improve, or do you want to improve mental well-being? If we start exercising, our mental well-being will improve as well. Whichever end we decide to start with, if we decide to start with meditation, that brings us back to being in control of our breathing, because let's face it, being in control of our breathing is pretty much what we can be in control of. So, whichever end we choose to tackle it from, it will manifest across. So that's why I'm not making huge distinctions between something that happens in the brain and in our minds and in our bodies, because it's just all one and it
I
influences.
think the most important message there is the last one.
This is yes. It is important to do it and to do it when we still can do it, because then it really has
Yeah, I
the
mean,
effect.
it's a bit like the fact we call it a health service. It's not an illness service. The only time we ever use it is when we're ill. And I think that to me is a very important message.
Yeah.
You know, it's always important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is if you can get an account.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's right, yeah.
At least 2 weeks, you know.
Great. This is another moment where we will exercise a bit. How you? I know, the jump is done. So how you've been doing with pushing against the floor?
Oh, well, you do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's start. Let's push against the floor. Let's push ourselves from the chair and just breathe. Just find your way to breathe. Whether you breathe in 3
That's the
counts in,
problem.
3 counts
I'm
out.
concentrating on doing that, and I stop breathing.
These synergies are not easy, and it takes some time actually playing with it, toying with it, finding how it works for you, whether you actually better start doing these little stretches and exercises and pushing against the gravity while you're standing or while you're sitting. If we stand up now, I will show you what I meant, and we will all feel it, what I meant when I said that our shoulders try to get there fast. It's when you push away from the floor, you push away from the ground, and you feel how your body, all systems is responding to it. You're straightening your spine, your posture is getting more straight and more active. You are more actively maintaining your posture, and you find the place behind your back where your abdominal muscles start participating or maintaining this. So you're thinking about 3 points. You have 1 point is one leg, the other point is other leg, and the third point is in between. This is where we're going. So this is a beautifully active stance. This is where we should start walking from. Now, what will happen after a while? We started walking, we will want to get there.
Yeah.
And we will put the shoulders forward again. Now, just feel the difference. You felt how it is when your abdominal muscles participate in the postural maintenance, okay? Now, take the shoulders down, put them a bit forward. There is no way you can engage your abdominal muscles. That is no way. It does not prompt you to breathe fully. You can breathe here. When you do this, you completely take out the diaphragm, one of the most important muscles in our body, out of function completely. So when you move your shoulders forward, do you realize how much weight you put immediately in your knees? And that your knees are not supposed to take this weight, because for this we have hips, because they're a much bigger joint. So some of the wear and tear from the joint, musculoskeletal perspective, is just done because our brain has enormous plasticity, which is amazing, because when we need it, it really works well. When we cannot use one arm because of an injury, we will develop other strategies of ways to work, to cope, to survive. But sometimes the brain is too active to develop a new strategy just based on an easy hint. The muscle system, the brain will develop a strategy around us walking in this way easily. But it's about us to actually realize where we are and where we actually want to be. And it's a huge difference, because the moment you push against the floor, you straighten up, you open up to a good breathe. A good breathe in means better breathing out. The better breathing out is, the better and deeper your next breath will be. So let's use the diaphragm for breathing out, but let's try to use it to breathe in as well, because it works as a piston in our body. So when we breathe in, we push the piston down, and it creates an increased intra-abdominal pressure in our tummies. And that that works like a cushion, that actually our top and our spine can rely on in maintaining the stance. When we release it, the weight in the joints that is misplaced is enormous. And that brings me to neutral position of our joints, which is something I've mentioned earlier on. We can sit down, pushing away from it.
I'm not following that.
It's always like a neutral position of our joints is a position where the joint is not getting harmed, where it's not torn to one side or pushed by muscles or tendons to the other side. It's just in a neutral position and where it does not get harmed. So our aim is to actually keep the joints in neutral position for as much of the time as we can, of course. So pushing away from the floor and raising up helps us, straightening our spine, helps us to prompt the joints to naturally get into this neutral position, because then we're not overloading the joints by making them do what they're not supposed to do.
But that's what I've just had 10 weeks ago a new knee, and that one had to do all the work. And for a little while after I'd had the knee done, I thought this was going to go the same way. But now that the use is fairly even, he's got touch wood.
Yeah, and that's self-repair, but I also know you exercise. Exercising is very beneficial because it also equalizes the load, re-equalizes the load, especially after an injury. But it is true that whenever a paired organ is injured, then you need to take care, tender loving care of both, not just the one that got the strain, but the other one as well.
Yeah, because I've been given a lot of physio for this, and I've been doing that as well. So and now I've got my exercise bike, and I do 11 kilometres. I don't know how 11 kilometres is, but that's what I do nearly every day now.
Yeah, but that's
all
fantastic.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have to do it to
I know.
get as mobile as you can, as quickly as you can, as well as you can,
The
you
problem
probably
I
wouldn't.
find with anything like exercise or anything like that, I just find it very boring.
Yeah.
And that's the big problem.
I can relate to that. Sometimes it helps maybe when you go with a friend, because then it's the social connection. So if you play golf,
That's right.
you go with a friend, and even if the weather is awful, you just go out. It's good to be out.
I've done a lot of sport all my life, but I've never actually exercised. The sport was the exercise. And it's kept me fit
Exactly.
till now, but I'm struggling to
keep up.
want to do anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Good.
Right. We have a few more slides to go through. I'll probably whisk through the healthy bones. The main message is that, well, we get at the risk of osteoporosis. Women a bit more, because there is something we call menopause, there is something we call andropause. It's not exactly andropause, there are quite a few arguments around using andropause or not, because pause means that there is a sudden change in the hormone production. So in women this happens more suddenly, that's why the term menopause is widely accepted. In men this happens over a longer period of time, so it is a bit hidden. So sometimes this can prompt you will have men who will say, well, I've been doing the same things for 20 years now, like my husband was telling me the other day, but he is getting closer to 50 now, and it's just not good enough to do things as he used to do them, because something more needs to happen. More drinking needs to happen, water. More exercise needs to happen on a regular basis to prevent and protect whatever there is he doesn't want to lose. And that's just one example. So both men and women experience decreasing levels of hormones. In men this happens much more gradually. The onset might be between 40 to 50, depends on genetic predispositions, on overall lifestyle over the lifespan, etc. In women it happens much faster. So then it affects bone density, and bone density starts decreasing after 35 years of age anyway. So this is a picture of a bone. Note the nice vessel or artery here. This is a difference between the normal bone matrix and the osteoporotic matrix. So the bone becomes much more porous. So it's much easier to break it. When this reaches a later stage, sometimes it's enough to just hit something with your arm and the arm gets broken. I'm not saying everybody gets there, but it is, osteoporosis is a risk, the bone fragility is a risk, and it poses other risks for the body because it's the bone is the mechanical structure for our body. Our muscles are attached to the bones. Healthy muscles means healthier bones, or more of a chance to have healthier bones. When our bones are not healthy, and we do not exercise because it's associated also with pain and there is more of a risk of an injury or fracture when we actually get injured. We also lose the muscles, therefore if we already have osteoporotic bones, the osteoporosis just progresses much faster. So bones and muscles work very much together, and for stronger bones we need to be thinking about stronger muscles. The muscles are also useful because it provides us with some kind of padding. It's a natural padding for the bone. Our body system is very clever. It's very ingenious. But we need to, when we think about bones, we need to think about muscles as well. To improve muscle function, we need to exercise. To have stronger bones, we need stronger muscles.
Yeah, the consultants said that the main thing that I need to do is strengthen these muscles to support the knee. I thought, wow.
Yeah, but it's also because it's mainly these muscles and these muscles that we were talking earlier that actually keep your knee in the neutral position. And neutral position for the joint is the best position for the joint to heal. So whenever there is an injury that occurs in the musculoskeletal system, usually after the surgery, if there is a fracture or something, or a rupture of a tendon, the surgeons will give us a plaster that will fixate the leg or the hand to facilitate the neutral position for the joint so that it has best chances to heal. And strengthening those muscles is actually what keeps the knees in the neutral position. You can try it when you stand up and you push your inner side of the foot down and you feel those muscles taking apart, then you immediately will feel the muscles on the inner side of your thighs, and this is the pressure, the synergy pressure that you need to create to keep the knee in an ideal position. And that's why we need to rediscover it in ourselves, because if I tell you, you need to get it to here and to there, well, all our bodies are slightly different, all our tendons are slightly placed differently, and so the only person who can actually tell how does it feel, whether this feels right, will be you. There is a little bit more about sarcopenia and frailty. We'll talk a lot about frailty. Sarcopenia is a part of it. It's a degenerative muscle mass loss. Now, muscle loss or muscle atrophy occurs naturally while aging, and we will talk a lot about why this happens, how this happens, what it links to in one of the later lectures or talks. But when, for example, we have an accident and we're in hospital and we're hospitalized and we're lying down for 2 or 3 days, we very quickly lose muscle mass, very quickly. So this can prompt the sarcopenia, because if the muscle loss is already occurring, this just makes another hit, and this other hit is what can swing us more towards frailty. So this is why some people actually are exercising or are doing something in the house or garden, they reach for something, they fall, there is an injury or fracture, and after a few days of hospitalization, a healthy elder person leaves the hospital frail. And the only way to, I won't even say combat the frailty, to work with frailty is exercise. So, but it's not always as easy as it seems. But it is estimated that 5% of people aged between 60 to 69 have frailty, and this rises to 65% in people aged over 90. And this is in people where it could be measured. This is not always measured research-wise in care homes. So in care homes, the situation is most probably even worse than that. There are some recommendations about making time for cognitively stimulating activities you've always enjoyed. Try new things. Try aqua aerobic. Aqua aerobic is brilliant. It's very safe. The water is very safe for us to bounce in, to exercise in. We just need to make sure we don't sleep on the way down or on the way down. But learning languages, learning music instruments is a phenomenal work for our brains. One of the best instruments apparently to learn to play is piano, because and the brain just needs to figure it out. Or learn a language, foreign language. You've always wanted to learn, you never had time. Learning new things is important, it's interesting, it makes us meet people, often. And I sometimes say, well, it doesn't matter for how long we go out and walk. If we can't walk for too long, we can go more often, perhaps. And then people tell me, yes, but then I meet my neighbour and they always make me angry, and I'm just annoyed, and then I'm annoyed for the rest of the day. And I'm saying, yes, on the other hand, it's still stimulation. You never know who you're going to meet. It can be the neighbour that you may have a small argument with, or you could just get annoyed, but it stimulates us. Nature, going out, stimulates us immensely. We see things, we see trees, it prompts us thinking about, it prompts all sorts of different thoughts. These are the stimuli we need to give to our brain. And if we're walking at the same time, having a nice chat with a friend, it's all lovely and rosy until it starts raining and you just don't want to go anywhere. And this is absolutely normal. It happens to everyone. It's not that some people are born with the capacity to keep the routines and exercise 100% of the time. They said that they will exercise Monday, Tuesday, Friday at this time of the day, and they always do it. This is insane. We need to allow some measure of chaos, some amount of chaos, but for as long as we're mostly doing things the better way we know about, rather than the other way, it's already getting us there. And I, on one hand, apologise a lot, and thank you so much for your patience, because we have overrun about 35 minutes. I hope it's been useful. There is an article I have published recently on Open Learn, which has 5 mini videos in it that are actually relating to the nutrition, hydration, physical, cognitive and social stimulation. They only last for 4 minutes. The longer one is probably 5 minutes. If you would like to get in touch with me, please do. If you can't think of anything you would like to hear more about, apart from what I've mentioned that is in store for you over the next coming months, if you can think of something at some point when you get home or later, drop me an email, please.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm just thinking of not a better way of running this sort of thing, but it would be, I know it would take long, but to actually have a group facilitation bit so we can share experiences, not just ask you, Kristen, but share experiences with each other, because I find it quite interesting what you said. Going into the room with you was quite interesting, because then you've got, like, look, I think they're using disabled people, because I figure that's discriminated with disabled people. And I was so tempted, I've never been more tempted in my life. Now I patiently inverted commas there. So I think there's lots of experiences we can share, and maybe more people to come if it was a more informal. I don't think that really to you, the lecture was fascinating. I couldn't take notes quick enough to say what you said anyway, but have you got that reference somewhere?
Yeah. And even if you put into the search engine, maybe Google, if you put Vseteckova, my surname, and 5 pillars for aging well, it will give you the article. But if you send me your emails, I can email you the presentation, and then you just click on the link, and it will take you there directly.
Well, I was going to say that would be far more easy because
Yeah,
out in front of the
absolutely.
computer then it doesn't do that.
Just please leave your email addresses with me. And I take that point, I think it's very important, and I will make less slides for next talks so that there is more space for us to share what works, what doesn't work so much. Because it would be fascinating for me to hear what works for you in terms of when you do want to exercise, when you do not want to exercise, when you want to, have you always wanted to learn something and now you have time and you are thinking, perhaps I'm not so interested anymore, or are there things you always wanted to learn and you're learning them now, or you're doing now?
I think it's also important that we get our friends, colleagues, whoever to come along as well.
Because you need to
Because
speak to it,
it's, and in particular men, sorry gentlemen, but they can't be told.
Okay, lovely.
So if we just spread the word, I think it's an excellent series.
Please do. And if you want me to come and talk where people easier gather, I'm happy to do that.
Well, we did say about you coming to Senior Voice, so we'd love you to come there. Yes.
I will absolutely come. Just send me some dates.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
what I was thinking.
You might come as a visitor.
You never know.
Well, that'd be I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for coming.